mic has given up there for some reason, so I'm just going to swap this one over. There you go, sorry. Not sure how that's happened.
It's all right.
Oh, it's gone. Yeah, I see it's disconnected. There we go.
I mean, everyone online didn't hear my intro? Okay, I'll do it again. So essentially what I want to walk through, I've got some stats on how Webflow has actually implemented our AEO practices, what we've been seeing around the different traffic that that's coming, that's converting. And then I'll talk a little bit about the AEO Suite that has been released. I think we had like an early release last week, and then the whole thing is going out next week. And then I'll talk a little bit about Optimize. I think really important to realize is, as Chris kind of mentioned, like your websites are no longer just for human beings. It's also for these AI bots as well. But when we think about optimization and conversion rate optimization especially, like that is for the human experience. And so that's really where we're also spending a lot of time. And then the third thing that I will briefly touch on at the very end is Analyze. And that's just kind of how we bring both of these types of tools together. So where can you get a better understanding of how your AI traffic is doing as it compares to that human traffic as well. Does that sound like what we were expecting? Okay, super. So just a refresh, and I think there's a handful of you that I know have seen kind of some of our AEO presentations, so some of these slides might look a little familiar, Dan. But just kind of an overall kind of let's level set. Traffic is changing, that's a secret to no one. But obviously like organic search, paid search, everything else is still very important. And I think as we'll see throughout the different ways that we're thinking about AEO and the ways to actually improve it are really based in those fundamentals of marketing and of SEO. Like those things really aren't going anywhere. It's just the ways that we can better collaborate with this kind of new traffic that we're seeing. So on that, I've kind of got some kind of stats here around the decrease in organic traffic that we're seeing. This is 15 to 25%, which is like a huge kind of change, a shift in where we're seeing that being replaced. In terms of like how B2B buyers are thinking about Gen I in this buying process. So if you're thinking about the ways that you are learning more about new businesses, you're typically running into having a conversation with some sort of bot in that buying process. And how much of this is really on impact, like thinking about what those conversations really are doing. So in terms of the visibility that you're having in those conversations is going to be really important because it's swaying a lot of decisions. And if you aren't visible in those conversations, or your clients rather aren't visible in those conversations, like how do we ensure that they really are? And so I've kind of mentioned this, right? The website now has kind of two audiences. So thinking more about, you've got your human visitors. Those human visitors are going to be really captivated by that design experience. I think that is something like I want to make super clear in this conversation too, is how important I think like having cutting edge design and cutting edge development is still the cornerstone to core web development. Like that is not going anywhere. We see a lot of point solutions now that are just building kind of landing pages and providing these quick fixes. It's not something that we see as like a long-term scalable thing. And so when we think more about like how important that human experience is going to be, it's ultimately going to be what is going to convert. And when we get to kind of talking more about Optimize, having that actual experience of connecting with a brand as an individual is what ultimately leads to conversion. And so as your clients are thinking more about like what is it going to be to convert customers, that is that design and that is that like very clean development. When we talk about AEO, it's just how do we ensure that those eyes are actually getting there? So as we think about kind of the new kinds of traffic, and this is, again, thinking more about the conversion rate that I was just mentioning, like when this is Webflow data as well. So on the left-hand side here, we've seen kind of an increase of where our self-serve signups are coming from. So 8% of those are coming direct from AI search. So it's really thinking about how Webflow is actually representing itself in these conversations. And I think I had mentioned this a couple months ago. There's a handful of studies around like what that conversion rate actually looks like when you have traffic that's been referred by AI. And I really do think along the lines of the cutting edge design and creating that brand that human beings are going to connect with. That's why we're seeing such an increase, right? Is you're able to actually find the brand that you're looking for in that conversation, but then when you land on that website, you're also connecting in a way that's already been somewhat validated in that previous conversation. So seeing a much higher conversion rate from those brands as well. So in terms of this is all, and I thought to share some of these stats mainly because Webflow talks a lot about AEO and AI, like what's Webflow doing? How are we actually doing it? And so this is a bit of like a Webflow on Webflow presentation. But you can see here, like we're really growing in terms of how much of our traffic overall is coming from AI and LLMs. We're seeing like a huge increase year on year in terms of just overall bot traffic. And so that kind of differentiation there is just, where are you being cited versus where are you being sourced from, that sort of thing. But overall, we're seeing ChatGPT is kind of driving that majority of where all of those conversations are actually happening and where that referral is coming from. Now, here is kind of like where Webflow kind of is thinking about stepping in. So this is a survey of, I don't know if you guys can see this, the source at the bottom, but it's 400 marketers were surveyed last fall. And it was kind of the question around like, how is AI impacting you? What are you planning to do with it? And marketing leaders are talking a lot about AEO and how critical it is to ensure that their brands are going to be represented. But there's not a lot of practitioners who feel fully like they're not comprehending like what does that actually mean? How is my job going to change as a marketer so that I am actually building for this new era of AI, or AEO rather. And that's kind of like where Webflow is seeing the gap and where Webflow is going to kind of help in terms of the new features that we're launching and the new kind of measurement and insights that we're hoping to provide Webflow customers and ultimately agencies around what you can provide with your clients. So this is kind of like the way that Webflow is kind of thinking about that adoption. Now, going back to SEO is still at its core. I think it's very. I feel like before AEO was a thing, every single conversation I ever had something to do with SEO, and I can't believe how few conversations actually have SEO now. I'm not often asked, what is this going to do for my SEO? How does Webflow actually change my SEO? Whereas before, like I'm talking like maybe 8 months ago, that was a conversation I could never not have. Which I think is quite interesting because ultimately a lot of your AEO success is going to be around how strong does your SEO look? How low is that bounce rate? How fast does your site actually load? And so I think when we talk a lot about like how important it is to still build a site that's going to be scalable, that has these reusable components that are built with clean code that you guys can do in Webflow, is really only going to have a positive impact on where bots are able to actually understand the brand that exists on that site and where AEO is ultimately going to be improved. So there's kind of 4 areas that we talk about at Webflow as it relates to AEO. So we've got content, technical, authority, and measurement. And I've got a lot of slides. Is everyone okay with that? So I'm going to kind of go through each of these, and then I'm also going to talk about the AEO Suite and kind of where that AEO Suite kind of helps to highlight these. So when it comes to and before I do that, I'm first going to talk about the AEO Suite. So the AEO Suite here, and if I have time, I think I will. I actually didn't check my time. When can I go until?
Until 7:30.
Okay, cool. So if I have time, I've got a demo, like I have my demo org up and stuff, so we can run through that also. But essentially, Webflow's new AEO Suite is offering this kind of flywheel, right? And we're talking about what are the ways that you can improve your content, improve that technical authority, and all of that is done through being able to better measure how you're actually showing up in all of these conversations, giving those recommendations, so using agents to recommend that, and then acting on that. So actually having a lot of these controls directly within Webflow, a singular platform, so that you can ship that in the same place that you're also building all of this content as well. Now you've got I've added the asterisks there. I know that this is a group that kind of, is in and out of enterprise. We kind of have a mixed audience here, so I just wanted to make sure it was clear kind of where the AEO Suite kind of applies for both our self-serve teams plus enterprise. So the latter half here, the recommending and acting, is going to be where Webflow self-serve product also is included. And I think this is what's coming, next week in June. You'll hear more about AI credits and the way that Webflow is going to be kind of adding that into our pricing, which I think was highlighted already, the pricing changes that have come. So on that note, though, I'm just going to kind of walk through kind of what the holistic look at that. So as we think about the measurement side of things, this is really getting a better understanding of when AI is crawling your site and kind of what are they actually citing. So what Webflow is doing is giving you an opportunity, or giving your clients an opportunity to actually share prompts that they're looking to see how they're showing up in. So basically, adding in different prompts of, working at Webflow, it's like, what is the best website builder, or where should I build my website? So those would be prompts that I would input into Webflow's AEO Suite. And then Webflow's running those prompts every evening, essentially, just tracking what is the result. Where does this brand actually come up? And so you'll see things like here, like a visibility, like an overall visibility score. We also have kind of your top performing topics. So these are going to be like categories of the different prompts that you're tracking toward. Something that we've also added as well, that's not in the screenshot, but is like your own domains. So also thinking more about, your website might not be the only place that your brand is being talked about. So wanting to get a better understanding of how are you being represented across, maybe any analyst relations and that sort of thing, and understanding better, even in Reddit, right? Understanding better, what do I actually look like in all of these different brands? And from that, it's really getting a better understanding of, well, what should I do about it? And so from the measurement side of things, we take those, and then you've got recommendations both from, and going back to those kind of 4 key pillars on the technical side of things, as well as content. So I know this seems definitely familiar with like the site audit that you would have in the bottom left of the designer, where you would see, I'm missing meta descriptions, or I'm missing page titles, or there's alt text not existent on an image. All of that's moving into a dashboard where, rather than having to do that at a page by page level, you'll have kind of the issue level and where all of those pages kind of are assigned to that specific list. So thinking much more in kind of, I think, Chris, you kind of made a joke about, you're like, what does agentic web marketing platform mean? I think this is a great example of where we see that web agentic piece coming into play, is understanding, okay, here's a clear overview of all the things that might be an issue within the site. And then it comes to acting on it. This is where we're getting those recommendations from actual agents within Webflow. And so you'll see here, this is just a screenshot of showing for meta descriptions, for example. Here are examples of new meta descriptions that we might want to include. And then as a user, you're essentially able to kind of select those, human intervention where necessary, of course, but actually ship them all a lot faster. So really seeing a lot more changes in terms of being able to assign changes to the measurement that you're seeing based on the recommendations. And I don't think I highlighted either the content recommendations either. So at the bottom, you can see at the top here, that's all the technical side of things. And then at the bottom around content. And I'll get into this a little bit more when I talk more about the content recommendations in that 4 kind of module thing. But not just missing content, but also stale content, things that might be a little bit outdated. I think Webflow is a really great example of a website that has a ton of stale content within our website. And you'll see I have a stat here kind of about just like how, I think it's like 6 of our, I'll get to it, but there's like 6 of our pages that are cited more than the rest of our site. And we have thousands of pages, and it's like 6 are at the very top. And that's because they're recent. It's because they have the right structure. So this is just a really great way to kind of ensure that you are keeping on top of that recent content, so that you're kind of leaning into what AI, like what LLMs are looking for. So on that note, so content maturity, this is kind of like the first one. And the way that this is kind of structured, this like 1 to 5 bit, at the very end of this, I have a QR code. If you haven't seen the AEO maturity model yet, no worries, and if you have, apologies that I'm gonna explain it again. The AEO maturity model is essentially a model that Webflow built that you can insert your domain, your client's domain, right? Understand like, where do you sit on this maturity model between 1 to 5 of these kind of 4 pieces of how we're thinking about AEO. How can you improve that AEO? And so as we go through each of them, it definitely it like gives you then recommendations based on, okay, your content is actually sitting at like a 3 because you're only answering questions in like clusters, for example, rather than being a little bit more programmatic with personalized content for AEO. So the different ways that you can kind of think about improving that maturity as we're looking at this AI era. So some more kind of like industry things here to think about. So previously, the average search of a Google search was only 4 words, but now we're seeing an average query length of 23 words, and this is actually growing. So again, like that kind of perception of kind of where those keywords exist obviously is really powerful for SEO as kind of the 4 words there to talk about. But now, as we think about how are we actually going to ensure that our content can answer the questions that people are asking within these LLMs. And so going back, I wanted to share more about like what Webflow is doing in terms of how we're approaching AEO. So Webflow.com kind of reframed a lot of our blog headings as questions. So rather than just kind of here's a topic, it was more thinking about structuring it like a question in the way that somebody might write into an LLM. And we saw a 13% increase in our AI-driven traffic. And going back to kind of thinking more about like that recency and like ensuring that content is new and fresh and up to date, it is super important to like LLMs like ChatGPT, for example. So this up here, 95% of ChatGPT citations were updated in the last 10 months. So if you think about any content that's maybe 1.5 years to 2 years old, like that content, while it might be effective for folks who are actually on the website, is not going to be cited in those LLM conversations. So it's thinking about ways that you can kind of refresh that and repackage that within the website. And just some kind of more stats there. Before I continue, how's this sitting with everyone? I'm seeing some nods. I'm seeing some blank faces. So I just want to, how's everyone? Is this like, is this working? Yeah? Okay. If you have any questions, like, you can ask me. Okay, so as we get into technical, again, structure from 1 to 5. Again, so thinking more around the SEO side of things, and as we're like changing a lot of that into, thinking more about how are we actually restructuring the site to fit for your technical maturity. So some more stats here. All of these are, again, this is like Webflow on Webflow content here. So we added a table of contents to all of our blog posts, and that increased our AI source traffic in a matter of weeks. Because this is a really clear and easy way for an LLM to understand exactly what exists within that in that blog. So you're seeing there 59% AI source traffic in 4 weeks, and then underneath that, we're seeing more SEO traffic in 23 weeks. So again, these things are they're very paired together. They're one and the same. You're going to see as you increase your SEO kind of skill set that you're all like very well versed in, that's going to have a positive trickle-down effect on your AEO impact as well. So, this I have some exciting things to talk about as well. So SEO metadata, alt text, schema markup. I know this is like, everyone knows what this is, but how important this is, especially for SEO, but also for AEO. And as we think more about like the agentic piece of things, I was talking to Philip from Clarkcode last week. I don't know if anyone knows him, but he was asking me about if the MCP server had any endpoints to actually update a lot of this content, because I think, I'm up here talking like, oh, update your content, update this, like it takes a lot of time. Webflow has an MCP server. I'm sure you guys are using those things. But right now, the MCP server doesn't actually have an endpoint to any of the structured data. But because he asked me about that, because I didn't know that, I was able to find out that is something that's actually coming in June. So that will be really exciting to be able to actually have all of these things connected. And as you're thinking about leveraging, Claude to actually do a lot of this work, you're not updating, content using an AI model and then switching and having to manually update in that structured data. You can kind of do that all in the same. And then still thinking more about the technical aspect here, so also thinking more about adding your FAQ into that. So You can see here the 57% of new citations and following the 2 weeks from these 6 pages. So that's what I was mentioning. So 6 pages where we had that FAQ added to our schema markup saw more referred traffic than the thousands of other pages that we have. So I think that's just like a really huge indicator in terms of like what those LLMs are crawling for, what they're looking for, and how you can just make that agent experience, I suppose, that AX, a little bit more agreeable. And then I think it goes without saying, as you increase your SEO, you're going to obviously see an increase in that organic traffic. So we saw a lift in 24% in 2 weeks as well. Okay, so thinking more about like the authority. So this is, again, I think, especially as if we go back to looking at the measurement of how Webflow is like offering that dashboard around how you're showing up in these different conversations. What are those mentions? And so you can see here kind of that 1 to 5 pillar again. So wanting to ensure that you're getting those kind of positive citations. I love this because this kind of goes back to like thinking about branding, thinking about design, thinking about like what is the actual experience that people have on the website, and where are you being talked about? Because I think that's something that, like, especially as a Webflow seller, I feel like sometimes we can get a little bit of tunnel vision around like, it's just the website, just the website, just the website. But a brand is so much more than that, and there's so much more going on. And I think having the ability to actually see where those other domains are, where you're being mentioned is one thing. But also having like the guidance as an agency and being able to guide your clients around wanting to understand like your brand doesn't only exist on your website, it is so expansive and is that's going to be the core and the biggest billboard. But what are we doing kind of thinking more like long-term and widespread? And I love the SO's PR. I just think it's kind of funny. Makes me think of celebrities. But to kind of support that, thinking more about like where brands are being cited within LLMs. So YouTube is actually the #1 cited domain by LLMs. So Reddit being super visible in Google's search index, and then obviously G2. So this is like thinking really more about, and I think I'll get in, I think it's my next slide, but it's really about the authenticity and the human intervention that goes into a website is really not being lost. I think oftentimes, especially when we talk about like generate so much content and do it really fast, and it's like, oh, just like get AI to generate all of it. It's like the AI knows it's AI. And so I think it's important to like remind ourselves that like it's not everything is going to be AI. Like it's still, there is such a value and such an edge to having that human input and having that human creativity that really isn't going anywhere. And if anything is really going to be the reason that something is going to be cited more, the reason that an LLM is going to refer to something more, because it is human generated. And I think stats like this around even something like YouTube being kind of the #1 cited domain is really indicative of how important that like naturally generated content is going to continue to exist. I removed the slide. It was a pie chart. I did remove it. Anyway, it was a pie chart that essentially showed like most of the content that is cited by LLMs is human generated. And I think, especially in our industry, like there's so much, like Chris mentioned it, right? We have so much AI fatigue. Like, I think it's very easy to feel this like fear that AI is just like taking over, is going to build everything, is going to write everything. Like, I don't share that. I think we are seeing like the actual numbers show that LLMs really much prefer content that is generated by human beings, because that's who it's serving, right? It knows its audience. Okay, last one here on measurement. So again, thinking more about like how are we tracking towards our better kind of structured measurement maturity. So this is just thinking more about like the changes that we're seeing within the different LLMs. I think this kind of ties nicely back into kind of all of the previous conversation or kind of previous sections that I've already mentioned. But you can see kind of the answers are really changing. This is from 4.0 to 5, kind of how LLMs are now giving a lot more recommendations, And so previously we were seeing these LLMs just kind of be very point blank, be just like, here is your answer. Whereas now they're having a little bit more of an opinion, and based on the information that they're like learning and crawling and reading about, they're providing their user with a bit of an opinion around that. And so how are we kind of ensuring that we're providing the right brand experience to these LLMs? And on that measurement side of things, just making sure that you're also kind of have a grasp on that. And so this is just kind of, thinking again about a flywheel. So you have like a hypothesis on it, you're going to build on it, you test on it, and you learn a little bit more. And so obviously Webflow's AEO Suite is there in the product and is there to do it, but there's obviously lots of point solutions as well that will give you those levels of measurement to kind of help you with that as well. So this is just kind of going back to thinking more about the MCP server and kind of where we're seeing the Agentic web marketing platform improve its kind of presence. So this is just quite a spike in terms of how we've seen MCP server usage. I think it's kind of a funny graph. I think we all know the MCP server got way better, and that's why we saw a big spike in it. But Webflow is also kind of understanding this as well and building a lot of new updates to it consistently. We have a new update, I think, coming at the end of next week to improve the MCP server. It's like the next version of it. And consistently kind of hearing more feedback around kind of what is it that you want to achieve, and then that's kind of what we're circling back to our product team to actually make it something that can continue to grow in this direction. So that was kind of my overview on AEO, as I hope it was helpful in terms of like understanding where Webflow is thinking about the maturity model. And I think this is kind of when I mentioned the maturity model, so that's like, those are the 5 kind of different levels that you're thinking about. And I think, yeah, here we go. So then it's kind of broken down into each of those pillars, and then how you're kind of leveraging each of them to help your clients kind of achieve that better representation. So I have, this is what it looks like. I've just blacked out the customer name. But essentially this is like, if you were to use the maturity model and see, here's what we're seeing. So you can see at the top, excellent FAQ coverage, solid depth across these pages, but here's where you've got opportunity, and here's kind of that recommendation. So I think like this is the QR code. If it's, you can honestly just Google it, like Webflow AEO. But if you think about like your clients and like wanting to better understand kind of like how are they actually achieving AEO, what's their representation level, what's the visibility looking like there, can maybe help to just kind of give some guidance around like what you might want to be focusing on, or kind of giving, I even think about it as like a completely other like SKU of business in terms of like a service offering within your agency. Okay, so that's kind of the end of my AEO spiel. But I did want to talk a little bit more about optimize and analyze. But I have 1 minute left. LOL. Okay, well maybe I won't talk that much. The only thing I really wanted to highlight with optimize, and I think I'll just leave it on this slide and I'll just speak to it and then I'll wrap up. But I wanted to mention optimize mainly because it is also where like so much more of the creativity lies. It's the optimized experience is what your human visitors are seeing. So in terms of like everything I just spoke about, like that's literally just for the LLMs. How do the LLMs better understand clients' brands? How do I ensure that those brands are actually represented in those conversations, cited accordingly, cited appropriately? But then when they land on the site, how do we ensure that they are converting? And so creating these experiences that are going to be personalized, Webflow Optimize, does a lot of personalization at scale. So it also uses AI, but it isn't a generative AI model. Like it's a predictive AI model that essentially, allocates traffic according to browser data. So like, where is this visitor from? What other behavior have they done? And here's what we've seen successful for other types of visitors. So it's just a different kind of way of approaching like using AI, but not in a way. And it's more for the human experience. And then the last thing really is just on analyze. I think this is a way for you to kind of bridge that gap between how are we performing for those LLMs, and then how do we see the conversion, and then being able to actually mirror those two things. So it kind of bridges those two things together. So anyways, that's Webflow's Agentic web marketing platform. Thanks so much. I hope that was helpful.
I'll grab the mic because we're down to one mic, and let me just clip that in, and I think we've got time for just a couple of quick questions, if that's okay, Karleigh, and then we'll jump into Ben's presentation. But yeah, thank you. That was really interesting, engaging, and I had a question. So, like, there's a statistic that 80% of answer engine optimization happens off website, and I think you touched on that. So Reddit, YouTube. Is there anything Webflow can do to change those numbers? Pushing content out, for example, into different platforms, or monitoring those platforms, or that's not Webflow's wheelhouse for now?
Well, I mean, with the... Who do you want me to? Yes. So I think with the AEO Suite, like with the measurement side of things, there's like domains that you own and domains that you don't own. And so when Webflow is running these prompts for you and understanding, okay, here's where your brand is being represented under these topics, it's not only telling you where you're being cited from the domains that you own, so from your Webflow domain, but also where you're being cited in those other conversations. Webflow is going to be the core platform for where your website is built, and I think I would love to see Webflow investing more in ensuring that it's an excellent web platform for how do you build an excellent website that engages visitors and is appealing to LLMs to cite properly. I think the best that Webflow can do is give you that insight in terms of like where else can you look to actually investing in your larger marketing strategy. I think Webflow's, the site that you have on Webflow is going to be that core, but ultimately each business is going to have a very different approach to their marketing strategy, and so we just want to be able to provide the tools that can support it best.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think when your brand is surfaced on these other channels, if someone wants to engage with that brand, inevitably they'll end up on the website. Yeah. And that's where we can do our best. Excellent. Yeah. Any other quick questions? So sorry, I stole the questions then.
Right. I wonder if you had any metrics on divide in mobile and desktop, and whether there's sort of differences in such answer results based on that.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I know that like within our analyze dashboard, like you can break it, like you can filter your audience by that visitor, and so that would be by the human visitor that's landing on based on a tablet or desktop, etc. Like you can definitely filter out by that. I'm not sure if it wouldn't matter, I guess, for the LLM side of things, like because it's just searching kind of like your general site overall. It wouldn't have any sort of tag to indicate that it's coming from a mobile or desktop, because it's just like a robot. But yeah, within the analytics that we have, you can break that down and filter it into desktop. Even like I don't know if you've seen it before, I can show you after if you want, but like point that you're on. So desktop will have one kind of visual heat map, and then your mobile will have a different heat map based on kind of what that behavior would look like. Yeah.
We need to keep moving. Just as a way of thank you, I'd like to present a exclusive Webflow bucket hat that you can show off around the office. And we're going to take a short break while I fix a microphone and get Ben set up. So grab a drink, visit the toilet if you need to. We'll start again in like 3 minutes. But thank you very much, Karleigh.